The scream hit the breakfast hall like a knife. A silver tray crashed. Glass exploded. And three identical boys, pale, perfect, dressed in tiny black suits, stood on the long dining table like little princes of a nightmare, their eyes glowing a violent red as they stared at the guests they'd trapped inside the manor. A rich woman in pearls tried to run. One of the boys snapped his head toward her so fast it blurred, and the chandelier above her shuddered like it wanted to fall. "Sit," he said in a child's voice that somehow sounded older than the house. Everyone froze, even the guards, even the butler, because everyone in Blackwood Manor knew the same thing. The triplets didn't throw tantrums. They tested boundaries and punished anyone who failed. Flora Jenkins didn't belong in that room. She stood near the doorway with rain in her hair, a cheap coat on her shoulders, and a toddler on her hip who kept rubbing sleepy eyes. She was 26, broke, and one missed payment away from losing everything. Her son Toby's asthma meds were due, her rent was overdue, and the only reason she dragged herself through the storm to this cliffside monster of a mansion was a number that didn't feel real: $10,000 a month, cash. When the staffing lady said, "unconventional," Flora thought it meant rich people weird. She didn't think it meant vampire royal children holding a whole breakfast hall hostage. A tall man stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the room like the darkness had been waiting to become him. Adrian Cross, the owner, the father, the reason nannies didn't last. He wore black like it was part of his skin, and his eyes were not human, violet, sharp, ancient. He didn't raise his voice, but the room went colder anyway. "Enough," he said, and the triplets paused, not because they feared him, but because they respected his power. Adrian's gaze slid to Flora, then to the child in her arms, and for a second the entire manor felt like it was deciding whether to let her breathe. "You brought a human child here," he said softly. "That is reckless." Flora swallowed the panic climbing her throat and forced her chin up. "I brought my son," she said, "because I don't have anyone else, and because your agency promised a live-in job. If that's a problem, pay my Uber back and I'll leave." Guests stared like she was insane. The butler looked like he was about to faint. The triplets leaned forward together, sniffing the air like wolves. "He's warm," one whispered. "He's small," another murmured. "He would pop," the third said with creepy curiosity like he was discussing a toy. Toby chose that exact moment to wave his teddy bear and grin. "Hi," he said, bright and fearless, as if the three glowing-eyed monsters were normal kids at a playground. The triplets blinked. Their red glare flickered. Not gone, but confused. Adrian's mouth tightened. "Rules," he said, voice calm but dangerous. "1. My sons must be in bed by dawn. 2. You do not enter the West Wing. 3. If they ask for red juice, you call my butler. You do not handle it yourself." Flora stared at him. "Red juice," she repeated. "Like fruit punch." A tiny smile cut across Adrian's face, humorless and sharp. "Something like that." Then he stepped closer, so close she smelled cedar and rain and something metallic beneath it. "You survive 48 hours, he said. "The job is yours, you fail, and you leave with nothing." Flora's heart hammered, but she nodded anyway. "Deal." They showed her the playroom on the 3rd floor, and that's where the real chaos began. The triplets didn't walk. They appeared, moving too fast for her eyes to follow, ripping around the room like living storms. A toy horse smashed into a wall. A heavy wooden block flew past her head and buried itself in plaster. They laughed together, low and synchronized, like the house itself was laughing with them. "Another nanny," the middle one said, standing on top of a bookshelf like gravity was a joke. "Father keeps sending them." The one on the left sniffed the air, eyes glowing brighter. "She smells like fear." The one on the right leaned in too close, his fangs fully visible. "She also smells like breakfast." Flora forced herself not to back away. Fear was a luxury, and she didn't have it. She put Toby down behind her, planted her feet, and raised her voice like she was in a noisy diner. "Okay," she said, clapping once. "I'm Flora. You're not going to bite anyone. You're going to clean this mess, and then you're going to bed like normal kids." The triplets stared like she'd told the ocean to stop. Then the one on the left hissed, "Make us." The chandelier swung as if something invisible had yanked it. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped. Toby's little fingers tightened around her sleeve. Flora's stomach turned cold. This wasn't just naughty. This was supernatural power, childish and cruel because it had never been corrected. So she did the only thing she knew how to do when a room full of boys got dangerous. She changed the game. She walked to the light switch and turned the room dark. The triplets' eyes glowed like coals. "We can see in the dark," one mocked. Flora nodded like that was fine. "I know," she whispered. "But can you see the monster?" The laughter stopped. The air held still. "What monster?" the smallest one asked, voice suddenly less sure. Flora pointed into the shadows like she had something behind her. "The one I brought." "He only eats naughty vampire princes," she lied, dead serious. "And he loves messy rooms. If he gets hungry, he bites." They hesitated. They were powerful, yes, but still kids, still curious, still vulnerable to the oldest trick in the parenting book, fear of something bigger. Slowly, one picked up a broken toy. Another slid a shattered piece of vase under the rug. The third grumbled, pretending he didn't care, but he helped too. Flora let out a quiet breath. She was winning inches, and inches mattered when you were standing. The kitchen exploded into chaos before sunrise. Plates shattered against the marble floor, the butler shouted something about ancient rules being broken, and 3 vampire triplets were perched on the kitchen island hissing like tiny predators ready to attack. Their eyes burned crimson in the dim light, and their fangs were fully out. They weren't playing anymore. They were starving. Flora stood between them and the refrigerator, holding a frying pan like it was a weapon, her hair tied into a messy knot, and flour dusted across her shirt. Behind her, the smell of sizzling bacon and warm pancakes filled the entire mansion. It was the most human smell Blackwood Manor had known in a century, and it was driving the vampire children completely insane. "Blood," Orion growled, crouched low like a hunting cat. "Red juice," Alter whispered, licking his lips. Calium, the eldest by 3 minutes and therefore the self-appointed king of the trio, tilted his head slowly. "You smell better than the bacon." The butler Higgins looked like he might faint. "Miss Jenkins," he whispered urgently, "this is an extremely poor moment for culinary experimentation." Flora didn't move. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept the spatula raised like a sword. "Sit," she ordered. The triplets stared at her, a human ordering them. Calium smiled slowly, and it wasn't a child's smile. Or what? Flora took a loud bite of bacon. The crisp snap echoed through the room. "Or I eat it all myself." The scent of hot bacon flooded the air again. Something shifted in the triplets' faces. Their predatory focus cracked for half a second and turned into something far more childish: confusion, hunger, curiosity. "1," Flora said calmly. Orion's nose twitched. "2," Alter slid off the counter. "3." Calium grabbed a chair so fast it scraped the floor. His brothers followed like wolves, suddenly remembering they were also little boys. Within seconds, 3 vampire princes were sitting at the kitchen table, staring at pancakes like they were alien technology. "What is it?" Orion asked carefully. "Food," Flora said. "It isn't bleeding," Alter pointed out. "That's usually a good sign," Flora replied. Calium poked a pancake with his fork like it might bite back. Finally, he took a cautious bite. His glowing eyes went wide. "It's warm." Alter shoved a huge bite into his mouth. "It's sweet." Orion grabbed 2 pieces of bacon at once. "This is better than blood." The kitchen went silent except for chewing. Flora leaned back against the counter, exhausted but triumphant. 3 vampire monsters who had terrorized 12 professional nannies were now fighting over maple syrup. Then a voice spoke from the doorway. "Remarkable." Adrian Cross stood there barefoot, wearing black silk sleep pants and nothing else. The early gray light from the ocean cliffs behind him made his pale skin glow like marble. His violet eyes moved slowly from the boys to the empty bacon pan, to Flora. "I specifically told you they don't eat human food." "You said they don't eat it," Flora corrected. "Not that they couldn't." Adrian walked slowly toward the table. His sons froze as he approached. Calium lifted a piece of bacon. "Father," he said proudly, "try the crispy pig." Adrian stared at the bacon like it had personally offended him. I haven't eaten human food since 1924. Maybe you just haven't had good cooking, Flora said. She lifted a fork with a piece of pancake and held it toward him. For a moment the entire room froze. The butler stopped breathing. The triplets leaned forward. The vampire king looked at the pancake, then at Flora. Then he opened his mouth. Flora fed him the pancake. His lips brushed the fork. His eyes closed. For a single second the terrifying immortal ruler of Blackwood Manor didn't look ancient or powerful. He looked tired. He swallowed slowly. When his eyes opened again, they locked onto hers with something completely different burning behind them. "Not ash," he whispered. Flora blinked. "What?" He stepped closer. "It tastes like hope." The room went completely still. But the moment shattered when tiny footsteps suddenly ran into the kitchen. "Mama! Toby!" The toddler ran straight toward Flora and hugged her leg. The triplets stared at him like he was the strangest creature they had ever seen. "He's small," Orion whispered. "He's squishy," Alter added. Kalium crouched down slowly. "Is he food?" Flora grabbed a wooden spoon and pointed it at them like a weapon. "If any of you bite him," she said calmly, "I will burn this house down." The triplets blinked. Toby giggled and poked Kalium's nose. "Cold boy." Kalium froze. The other two leaned closer. "He touched you," Orion whispered. "He's fearless," Alter murmured. Toby lifted his teddy bear. "Friend." The triplets looked at each other. Then slowly Kalium nodded. "Friend." For the first time in years, laughter filled the halls of Blackwood Manor. But the peace lasted exactly 3 days. Because on the 4th morning, the giant iron gates of the estate slammed open, and the woman stepping out of the black limousine carried a silver blade designed specifically for killing vampire children. Lady Beatrice, High Inquisitor of the Vampire Council. And she had come for the triplets. Flora felt the blood drain from her face as the guard stepped forward. Adrian's jaw tightened. Beatrice's eyes slid across the room, landing on Toby. "A human child," she said coldly. Her blade glinted in the sunlight. "Interesting." Adrian stepped forward instantly. "They are under control." Beatrice smiled slowly. "Then you won't mind if we test that." Upstairs, the triplets heard her voice, and their glowing eyes turned red again. The manor shook, because if the council decided the children were dangerous, they wouldn't imprison them. They would execute them, and Flora Jenkins had exactly 1 minute to stop it. The moment Lady Beatrice stepped into the grand hall, the entire manor felt like it stopped breathing. Her heels clicked slowly against the marble floor, each step sharp and deliberate, like she was measuring how many lives she might take before sunset. The silver blade in her hand wasn't decorative. It was an execution weapon designed to end vampire bloodlines. Adrian Cross stood in front of the staircase like a wall, his violet eyes glowing faintly, but Flora could see the tension in his shoulders. The triplets were upstairs, and if they panicked, if they lost control, the council would not hesitate. Toby clung to Flora's leg, unaware that one wrong move could start a massacre. Beatrice's gaze swept the room and landed on Flora. "You," she said calmly, "the human." The word sounded almost insulting. Flora forced herself not to shrink. "That's usually what people call me," she replied. Several guards stiffened in surprise that she spoke back. Beatrice tilted her head slightly, studying her like an insect pinned to glass. "Interesting. The reports said a nanny had somehow pacified the triplets." Her eyes slid toward the staircase. "I find that difficult to believe." Adrian's voice was controlled but dangerous. "My sons are under control." Beatrice smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind if we test that." At the top of the stairs, 3 pale faces slowly appeared. Kalium, Orion, Alter. Their eyes glowed dim red as they stared down at the strangers holding silver weapons. The manor lights flickered as their emotions stirred. Flora felt the tension building like thunder before a storm. If the triplets sensed threat, their instincts would take over, and Beatrice would have her excuse to destroy them. Flora didn't think. She simply walked forward and stood between the council and the staircase. "Breakfast," she said loudly. Everyone froze. Adrian blinked. The guards looked confused. Even Beatrice paused. Flora clapped her hands once, sharp and commanding. "Boys." She called, like a tired mother calling kids to the table. "If you don't come down right now, your pancakes are getting cold." The triplets looked at each other. Orion whispered, "Pancakes." Alter nodded seriously. "We like pancakes." Callium sighed dramatically like a bored prince. "Fine." To the absolute shock of the Vampire Council, the three most feared vampire children in Seattle casually walked down the stairs and sat at the dining table like polite schoolboys. Flora set plates in front of them, pancakes, bacon, syrup. The room was silent except for chewing. Beatrice stared. Adrian stared. The guards stared, because three vampire royal heirs, who had been labeled uncontrollable monsters, were quietly eating breakfast like normal children. Alter raised his hand politely. "Mother." Flora blinked. "Yes." "Can we have more bacon?" The word hung in the air. "Mother." Beatrice's sharp eyes moved slowly between the boys and Flora. "You call a human woman mother," she said coldly. Callium shrugged. "She feeds us." Orion nodded. "And she doesn't scream." Alter added proudly, "And she threatens to burn the house down." Beatrice looked at Adrian. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally she turned to her guards. "Put the weapons away." The silver blades lowered. Adrian exhaled slowly. Flora hadn't realized she was holding her breath until that moment. But Beatrice wasn't finished. She stepped closer to Flora, studying her face carefully. "You have done something very few vampires have managed in centuries," she said quietly. "You made predators behave like children." Flora shrugged. "Turns out kids act better when someone actually treats them like kids." For the first time, Beatrice almost smiled. "Perhaps," she said, "the council misjudged this household." She turned toward Adrian. "Your sons will remain under observation, Lord Cross, but it appears liquidation will not be necessary." Relief hit the room like a wave. The council guards left the manor. The black limousine disappeared down the cliff road. And for the first time since Flora arrived at Blackwood Manor, the danger passed. But when the doors closed, Adrian turned to her slowly. "You stood in front of the Vampire Council," he said quietly, "without fear." Flora crossed her arms. "I was terrified." "You hid it well." For a moment they just looked at each other. Then Toby waddled across the floor holding his teddy bear and raised it toward Adrian. "Up." The Vampire King of Seattle looked at the toddler, then awkwardly picked him up. The triplets burst into laughter. Adrian looked completely confused holding a human child who was patting his hair. Flora laughed too. And somehow, in that strange moment, the terrifying ruler of Blackwood Manor looked less like a monster and more like a man learning what family felt like. Weeks passed. The manor slowly changed. There were soccer games in the hallway, cartoon marathons in the living room, pancakes every morning. The triplets stopped glowing red with hunger and started arguing about toys like normal brothers. Even the staff began smiling again. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the Pacific cliffs, Adrian stood beside Flora on the balcony overlooking the ocean. "You changed everything," he said. Flora shrugged lightly. "I just made breakfast." "No," Adrian said quietly. "You gave my sons a childhood." He reached into his pocket. A ring caught the fading sunlight. Flora's eyes widened. "Adrian." "I ruled for 4 centuries," he said softly, "but I never learned the one thing that mattered." He knelt. "Will you stay, not as their nanny, but as their mother?" The triplets were already spying from behind the curtains. Say yes, Orion whispered loudly. Alter nodded. We want pancakes forever. Callium added, and a mother. Flora laughed through tears. Yes, she said. Adrian stood and kissed her as 3 vampire triplets cheered behind them. And that is how a broke single mom with $43, a toddler, and a frying pan accidentally became the queen of the Seattle vampire court. But here's the real question. If you were Flora, would you trust a vampire king with your heart? Or would you run before the fangs came out? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story of vampires, chaos, pancakes, and unexpected love, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and watch the next story on your screen. Because trust me, the next Vampire King story is even crazier.